I really appreciate everybody coming out this afternoon to build community, to get educated and informed. I want to thank right off the bat all the presenters that have come from across the state. A lot of these people have been giving significant parts of their lives to save our water, protect our land, and empower our communities. So thanks again for coming. We're going to start off today with Vernon Teller, our friend. She's the governor of Isleta Pueblo, and she's going to just give us a little welcome and offer a little prayer for us. So thank you, Verna.
I know the acoustics aren't that good here. Can you hear me? Okay, I'm good. Yeah, okay, thank you. Hinamam Kimam Kadimbak. My name is Verna Teller. I'm from Shewifdoy, which is also known as Pueblo of Isleta. I am currently serving on the Pueblo of Isleta Tribal Council. I'm the former governor. How about right there? Can you hear me? I don't know. Is it good? How about there? Okay. My name is Behuishiri. Some people call me Verna Teller. I'm from Shewifdoy, which is a Pueblo of Isleta, and I'm the former governor there, and I'm currently serving on the Pueblo of Isleta Tribal Council as a council member, past president of the council, and former chief judge for the Pueblo of Isleta. Um, Thank you to Mark, and thank you to all of you for being here today. And I'm going to open this meeting up. I'm going to take very little of your time because I know there's a lot of good people here to share their thoughts and share their experience um, in regards to the protection of our mother, Kikewe Ikawi. And so with that, if you would stand. Huni hui kewe I amaparu. Yo ai hui I an Kikewe Ikawi an huni hui a tenamiri min ayun turek. I wache min ayun na tui mo ian tu kim hawe in pi ani ba huni hui wada kinewe chachen na guitin. Yudit ainin yun yan tu I in kim hawe in pi ani ba huni hui wada na piweshe na bekache. Huni hui yuna ma piwe chache. Yo huni hui Kikewe I awe yo aki hawe pi awe the anwe dan wimtin menwek. Yo ahun hui yan turek umning fioning kimoin umning kopiowi amik kusil humi kim hawin ahun hui imawin I kyu namiri minawem yo awada na kuwa na suwim tin kunama hi abu kim uwe in yo ahun hui hariye uwami in awanum I kyu na ama awanum I kiwe pio shewe awanum I kyu namiri we yo ahun hui na tlemi kunawe hi kuna taipe hi yo huni hui kawe ki tuki when I o te in I kim hawe in pi ani ba huni hui kinawe te hi na kuitin. Atu wei te ko fir wei te fir wei te ache wei te ke pian ai tapin wei te na ka ke in na I huni hui kim hawe in pi ani na huni hui te na miri mina yo I minting na tlewim na wei na kuitin huni hui kim hawe ba kinawe te hi herkem I ai chupit e ko mi kuni hui e ko mi huni hui na tuim yan te ina we mi chupi up na mi him I herkem in kewe. Thank you. I'm just going to translate that and then you can have a seat. I guess before anything, as the creator and the great mother to give us permission today to gather here and share our thoughts, and to give us permission to ask them for their blessing and to ask them for their guidance in this work that we are all here for, which is to protect her. When we ask the spirits of the four directions and the center to guide us as well in this work. This work is very complex. It's hard, but it's our responsibility and our duty to protect our mother. If we continue to betray our mother, if we continue to offend her and to violate her, then we are violating and betraying the trust of our children and our grandchildren, and for those that are not yet born. And so I have asked, and we all honor our great mother and the Creator, who are one and the same. In our tradition and our belief, they are one and the same, the feminine and the masculine. And we ask that they also pray for us, and they engage the spirits that work for them and with them, of which there are many that we believe in: the cloud spirits, the rain spirits, the wind spirits, all of those who live among us and are part of who we are. And this isn't just a journey about science. It's not just a journey about politics. It's really a spiritual journey. And so we ask that the Great Mother and the Creator help us as we move forward to protect her. It's our responsibility as her children to do that. And as Native people, I think that we have that great responsibility, and I think finally we're coming full circle. People throughout the world are finally recognizing that Native people have been right all along, that all things are living, and all things are alive, and all things are connected. And so however long it's taken for us to get to this point, it's a good place to be. And all we can do is hold hands and move forward and work together. And so with that, we ask for strength and guidance from our Creator and our Great Mother. So I thank you all for being here. I'm not going to take time. There are many people here that have, I think, very important things to say. And so with that, I again thank all of you for being here today to share your thoughts and your spirit with all of us.
Thank you, Verna. In that spirit, let's begin. Just some housekeeping stuff. We are One River. We have a sign-up sheet on the table in the back. We have a space for your name, any skills you might have if you'd like to participate, social media, writing, anything really. Space for your email address, and maybe some hours per week that you might be willing to participate. Thanks to everybody for coming. Thanks to our speakers and our panelists. We're gonna go for an hour with some speakers, and then we'll have a short break, and then we'll get our panel discussion started. We have a great lineup, and I think you guys are gonna really enjoy. So with that, let's get started. Our first speaker is We Are One River's very own Mark LeClaire. Please welcome Mark.
All right. Thank you, Verna, for those beautiful words from the heart. You know, we're blessed to live in such a resource-rich state. Chief among those resources is the rich wisdom and culture of our indigenous neighbors and relatives. I wouldn't be here today If it weren't for Standing Rock and the incredible leadership of the youth and elders there, and the over 300 tribes that came there to support, it was a transformative experience for me, for thousands of us. And I want to share one of the beautiful memories that I have from that time. It was this thing that would happen every night, just after sunset. Kind of like became a thing. It was like our thing. And no matter what bullshit went down every day, no matter how many rubber bullets were fired at us, no matter how much drama we had to deal with, no matter how many times that surveillance plane buzzed over us, there would come this moment of peace and quiet right after the sun went down. And in that twilight, the haze of the campfire would just hang there. And inevitably, someone, somewhere, would shout out, "Mini Wichoni." That's Lakota. Translates roughly as "water is life." And then here you'd hear someone across, way on the other side of the camp, so maybe even on the other side of the Cannonball River, somebody'd say, "Water is life. Mini Wichoni, water is life." We shouted that out. It was our prayer. It was our mantra. We shouted with joy, with conviction, with determination, as if we somehow knew we had to keep reminding ourselves of it until we would never forget, as if we could burn it into the collective memory of America. We repeated it night after night after night until the world listened. Water is life. Our resources are sacred. They're not here to be extracted, exploited, consumed, or profited from. They're what sustains us. One of the other resources that we have here is oil and gas. We've been in an extraction state for a long time, and right now there's a fracking boom exploding across our landscape. And fracking, I'm not going to spend too much time, I'm just trying to give a general introduction here. But it's, the more I learn about it, the more I realize it's kind of a Wild West kind of a technology. It's been around basically as long as oil and gas drilling has been around. Way back in the day, some of the prospectors were realizing that the gas, the oil wasn't coming out, and they would used to throw dynamite down there and it would start coming out. Back in 1969, right here in New Mexico, they had the bright idea of trying to fracture the shale. That's the layer of rock that traps the oil and the gas. They said, we know there's oil down there. Why don't we try to fracture that with a nuclear bomb? They detonated 4 nuclear bombs under the earth, and it worked. A whole lot of gas came out. But you know what? They couldn't sell any of it because it was so radioactive. But they tried it 2 more times. The same thing happened every time, and that same sort of mentality permeates what's still going on today. I don't know if they know what they're doing, but I do know that we don't know what they're doing. And this is a really important point, especially after Dick Cheney and his Energy Task Force passed what's famously called the Halliburton loophole. It protects the industry from having to disclose any of the chemicals that they use when they frack. It's all proprietary. We also don't really understand what happens underground. They drill down 2 miles underground. They inject water, sand, and chemicals at incredible pressures, over 8 tons per square inch. Those chemicals they use, we know there's almost 600 different chemicals that have been detected. Many of them are highly carcinogenic. The water, 4 million gallons per frac on average, disappears underground. But the water that comes back out is laden with all kinds of metals from deep under the earth. Metals like mercury, lead, arsenic, cadmium, selenium. These are all very toxic, and tests consistently show that the produced water that comes out of these wells has very dangerous levels of heavy metals. So the regulatory system that's supposed to be protecting us from this is also completely broken at the federal level and at the state level. There's no funding for it. Even the oil companies themselves will acknowledge that there's not enough inspectors. Right now there's an inspector in New Mexico would be able to visit a well probably once every 4 years maybe. There's a very small number of inspectors and there's thousands and thousands of wells. And I'm sure some of the other presenters are going to touch on this. And it's a system that relies on self-reporting. We allow the oil and gas corporations to tell us when they spill. That's how it works. And in 2009, one of our state regulators tried to assess a penalty on one of the oil companies. And they turned around and sued the state. And because of that lawsuit, the whole system of assessing fines and penalties was changed. And now we don't even have the funding and resources to assess a penalty. We haven't assessed a single penalty since 2009. And we know that there's over 1,000 spills a year happening in our state. So it's really a risky proposition. It's so risky that France, Bulgaria, Germany, and Scotland have already banned fracking. And the United Kingdom, Romania, Denmark, Ireland, South Africa, the Czech Republic, not to mention the states of New York, Vermont, and Maryland have said, no, we're not going to have fracking here. So we believe that we need to also push for a moratorium or a ban on fracking in our state, because we just don't understand how much water they're going to use. We don't understand where it's going to go. With this Halliburton loophole, they're allowed to inject it directly into our drinking water, directly into our aquifer. That's legal, the way the system stands right now. So we've been sold this bill, this idea that fracking is going to be a transition fuel, that it's clean, that gas is cleaner than coal or anything else that we have available to us. I've been looking into this. A lot of scientists have been studying this, and one of the studies I want to mention is by these two scientists, Howarth and Ingrafia. They're very well respected in their fields. In fact, Ingrafia spent his whole career, 30 plus years, as a physicist and geologist actually consulting for the oil and gas industry. But they became concerned about methane. Methane is a very, very potent greenhouse gas. It's 86 times more powerful than carbon dioxide in the short term. And they started realizing that methane leaks out of these fracking wells. It leaks when they drill the first well hole, the first bore. It leaks when they put the cement casing around it. It leaks when they pipe it out. It leaks from the compressor stations. It leaks from the pipelines. It leaks out everywhere. And they started taking that into account. And here I drew up this graph. And what this shows here is that if you allow for methane as a greenhouse gas, you can compare it. This is coal over here. This is the amount of greenhouse gases that are released. Here we have diesel. The orange you can see is the carbon dioxide. This little red line is the methane. So coal and diesel. Here we have conventional gas, which does leak. But here we have fracked gas. You can see that it's by far the dirtiest fuel that we have. So this is really pushing us over the edge. All the science we know about climate change is coming to pass, and it's happening faster and stronger than even the scientists that have been spending 20, 30 years working on this have predicted. This is killing us. So why are we going to give our land? We give our land to these companies for nothing. They use our public lands. They pay next to nothing. They take our water. They give us a pittance for it. We even pay for the roads that they're going to use, because every time they frack, it requires hundreds of trips back and forth with these massive 18-wheelers. We are subsidizing this industry for what? So a handful of people and corporations can become immensely rich and powerful, while the rest of us are burdened with a dual legacy of poverty and persistent pollution. This is what's going on right now. And you're going to hear, well, we need this money. This is what the politicians are going to say. We need this money. We rely on this. This is our revenue. This is how we pay for our schools. We've been an extraction state for over 100 years here in New Mexico, and we all know the truth of where we are. Our economy is dead last in this country. Our education system is dead last in this country. But you know what? We are number one in the per capita emissions of methane. We're number one in that. So we know that it's time to move in a different direction. The truth is simple. It's only the lies that get complicated. So we're building a movement today. We're not going to demand a moratorium on fracking. We're going to achieve a moratorium on fracking. And we need all of us to come together. We need the grassroots leaders in our communities. We need our spiritual leaders. We need our elders. We need our environmental organizations and our politicians to get on the same page so that we can have a future for our children and our grandchildren. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Up next is Maya King Flaherty and Kendra Pinto. Maya is a public lands fellow with the Sierra Club, and Kendra is a community organizer in the Counselor area. Please welcome them.
Thank you, Mark, as well, for allowing us to be here and kind of talk a little bit about fracking and impacts in the northwestern part of the state of New Mexico. So I'm Maya King Flaherty. I'm the Public Lands Fellow for the Rio Grande chapter in Albuquerque, and I also work with the Greater Chaco Coalition, in which we're trying to address some of the health impacts of fracking. And so I'm just kind of go through some kind of general guidelines about what fracking is, also some of the methane emissions, so there will be a little bit of repetition from what Mark kind of went over, and then Kendra is also going to talk about some of the impacts too.
Yate, she Kendra Pinto and she, Tachini Shlo, Kiani Bashichin, Nakaidene, Dashache, Ashihin, Dashanale, Besha, I'm practicing my Navajo. I'm from Twin Pines, New Mexico, and Counselor Chapter House is where I should be spending a lot more time with Samuel Sage over here, and I just want to take this time really quick to say thank you to what I would consider my mentors, Sam and Daniel. Thank you for teaching me all of this and to be brave, because this is one thing that we lack in that area is loud voices and bravery, because we have fear out there. I didn't plan on crying, I'm sorry. I always do this, but anyway, thank you.
Do some movement here. Yep, next slide. Yep. So in northwestern New Mexico, that's where we have the San Juan Basin. And the San Juan Basin is where the Mancos Gallop Shale formation is that's being fracked at the moment. There are over 40,000 oil and gas wells in this region of the state. And the blue dots represent the gas wells and the red dots represent the oil wells. And then where you have that little circle is where Chaco Canyon is. So that's just to kind of put it in perspective how these wells are starting to encroach and inundate the communities and on the national park. So in northwestern New Mexico, the BLM, Bureau of Land Management, they're the agency that basically manages the public lands up there. And their latest resource management plan for development was from 2003, and that plan never accounted for the impacts of fracking. And the EIS, the Environmental Impact Statement, a thorough analysis was never carried out within that. And in 2003, they found it to be economically and technologically infeasible to frack the Mancos Gallop Shale. But with the onset of fracking, it made it possible to start extracting oil and natural gas. So that 2003 Resource Management Plan, it violates the NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act, and also the National Historic Preservation Act. Again, they didn't do any analysis or consultation on some of the sacred landscape and areas in there. So we start seeing the first fracking wells around 2009. And then by about 2011 or 12, that's when we start kind of seeing an explosion of fracking wells. And the way they got around this is they would conduct individual environmental assessments. These are EAs on each application permit to drill. And every time they issued a FONSI, which is a finding of no significant impact. And throughout this process, they didn't consult with any of the tribes as well within that process and didn't inform people about this. And through this, the BLM has been able to approve over 300 fracking wells, and they're still continuing to approve fracking wells. And they oversee the administrative process on public, tribal trust allotments, private and state lands. And over 91% of those lands are now leased for oil and gas. So we've heard a little bit about fracking. This is just kind of a visual. So fracking combines horizontal drilling with hydraulic fracturing. So you can drill a well to the depths of about 2 miles below the Earth's surface, and then that piping curves at a 90-degree angle, and you can frack in every direction. And then it can extend up to 2 miles more until it reaches the shell. At this point, you have a deadly cocktail of really fine-grained sand, water, and also up to 600 chemicals that are pumped through the well at immensely high pressures. And you can't really see them, but it'll create these little cracks. They're called fissures that release the oil and the natural gas to the surface. And that water, it's also called produced water as well. Some of that water, it does come up back through the well, but it's also left on storage tanks on site and overflow pits where some of the contaminants are just left to emit in the air. And some of that water is also injected back into the earth. These are known as injection wells. And this is a picture of a fracking well that was taken sometime this spring along US 550 as you're driving up to Farmington. Okay, so the Mancos Gallop Shale wells, on average, they use about 1.3 million gallons of water. It's a little bit less than the average 3 to 5 million. And the reason for that is because their fracking fluid, they use about 70% nitrogen. And then they have about 30% water. And then that nitrogen kind of converts into like this foam that's injected down into the well. But given the high permeability nature of nitrogen gas, it means that the likelihood for groundwater contamination is actually higher. So some of that produced water, as I said, it's injected back into the subsurface. It's in storage tanks or in overflow pits. Next slide. And I just wanted to kind of segue a little bit into methane. As you heard, all throughout the oil and gas processing, methane is intentionally flared. It's combusted into CO2. It leaks and it's vented. This happens at pipelines, wellheads, storage tanks, all throughout the process, compressor stations. Next slide. And methane, which is the natural component of natural gas, as we heard, is about 86 times more potent than carbon dioxide. So it's got a lifespan for about 20 years, and within that 20-year lifespan, it can do a lot more damage to the environment because of its heat-trapping properties than carbon dioxide. But then after that 20-year cycle, it starts to kind of dissipate. So this is just kind of a graph that shows kind of methane emissions by industry. And oil and gas accounts for about 90% of the emissions in the San Juan Basin. That largely contributes to the methane plume. We've got a 2,500 square mile methane plume of methane that's just kind of hanging over the Four Corners area, and it's because of this continual release of methane. And just to kind of go over a couple of more facts, I mean, methane in 2004, we wasted about 180,000 metric tons of methane, and this is also a resource, it's a public resource that belongs to all of us as well. And by capturing that methane, it can also help to kind of fund some of the much needed improvements and developments that we have in the state. I think since 2014, I don't really have this, but I think we missed out about $14 million worth of funds because of methane emissions. And it's also responsible for a quarter of man-made global warming. And when methane escapes, you also have other volatile organic compounds like benzene, toluene, ethylbenzene, and xylene that also escape alongside of methane. And when methane and nitrogen oxides interact with the sunlight, it causes smog. And smog is particularly harmful for children and also the elderly population because it can cause asthma and it can also lead to upper respiratory diseases as well. So now I'm going to hand this over to Kendra, who's going to talk a little bit more about some of the kind of direct impacts to communities.
Right. So with the chemicals that they use, it can affect our health. And this is air we breathe. I just want to remind everyone that I'm within half a mile of the closest well site. So I think it's 1 in 3 Americans live near a well site. So it affects our air and water, and you can really see that in air with the smog. Like, it's pretty disgusting yellow band across the sky. It increases truck traffic. So with this truck traffic, you know, we're not only worried about public health, we're worried about public safety. Because with these trucks, a lot of these well sites that are put up have very narrow dirt roads. And on these dirt roads, they're also shared with the local community members. And these are people going to their jobs, going to school, going to doctor's appointments, people getting their groceries. And the accidents that have occurred out there has increased. Just within the past week, there was a truck that was turned over on the road. And it was around a curve, so he was speeding. Like, how else is that truck going to be on its side? And this is the kind of attitude that these truck drivers have every single day that they're out there. They don't care. They don't care what happens outside of their little well site because they're just there for a job. And you can see that every time you look out. I mean, I wish I had, radar gun, so I can just stand there and report it to the company because they like to tell you that they have monitors on their trucks for their employees and they can't go over 55 miles per hour, but it's like, actually, I just had a truck run past me at 80 miles per hour and it's midnight and he has one headlight. So these are things like, we see the people who live in the community, we see every single day, and not just 8 to 5. It's a 24/7 process. And I think that's really hard for people to accept that this activity is ongoing. We see them out there all the time. I was just at the Window Rock Navajo Nation Fair sharing with other members of the tribe. And I tell them, these are men we don't know. We've never seen these men before, and I was just asked a question, well, what was it like growing up in Twin Pines? I'm like, well, we knew everyone in Twin Pines. We knew who passed through there. Now there's hundreds of people there that are from like out of state. We don't know these men, so we have to talk about the women and children who are exposed to risk every time they step out the door, because women can be approached by these workers. It's a very real thing, very real. And when I talk about this stuff and I mention it at our meetings with BLM or our senators, you know, they get very uncomfortable because they don't want to talk about that. They don't want to admit that that's happening. And I wish Cheyenne was up here to talk about that, because she knows a lot more than I do about that sexual assault against women and children. But I just really wanted to mention that because that's not talked about enough. People like to avoid that subject because it's uncomfortable, but it's happening and it's real and it's increasing. There have been 2 ladies already picked up on the side of the road, and one of these ladies was picked up by my father. She refused to report it to the police, and she had no idea what day it was or where she was. This was recent. You know, this is not in the paper 20 years ago. This is this year. So I think everyone needs to know about those risks, and not just truck traffic and public safety. Those are important, but it's also, we need to shine more light on the sexual assault. The map up here, I wish I had a laser. So the upper left is the Naizi area. Do you have a laser? The middle bubble of the smaller bubbles is the Liebert area. That's where I'm at. And the lower is Counselor, right? Okay. I'm not a very good map reader, so I'm like, what is this? Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I'm just like everywhere. Last year in July, we had an explosion in Naizi. And with this explosion that happened, what we shed light on is that there is no public evacuation, no public emergency plan provided by these companies that are bringing the risk to us. And as far as I know, there still is no plan at the chapter houses, and we've requested that from them. With this explosion, they did their own internal investigation. So what happened? We don't know. And will they ever tell us? No. This is a picture of the explosion. And, you know, every time I see this picture, I just picture the community members that were parked on side of the highways. They're sitting on side of the highways waiting in this danger cloud that's forming around them with nowhere to go because of that plan. The plan that was missing. A plan that should be a simple enough ask, right?
I'm just going to briefly talk about some of the health effects as well. When you're breathing in like these VOCs, volatile organic compounds associated with fracking and the chemicals, it can affect your brain and your nervous system, your lungs. It can lead to lung cancer. Skin, these chemicals also irritate your skin, burns your skin, your eyes, your ears, your throat. So these are some of the chemicals that communities are inundated with on a daily basis. And this is just kind of a general list of some of the health impacts. And then, so what we're trying to do is we are working on a health impact report that actually documents some of the very real kind of impacts. And we have been doing some air testing to kind of see what type of chemicals are in the air that people are exposed to. And we've tested at sites that are within a half-a-mile radius from where communities live. Because it's been shown within literature that if you live within a half-mile radius, your likelihood for developing any type of health ailment will increase. And this was the training that was provided by Juan Reynosa from the Southwest Organizing Project back in October. So this is what the bucket looks like. This is developed by Global Community Monitoring, and it's kind of a cost-effective way for communities to do their own testing. And the way it works is you have this Tedler bag inside, and you kind of connect that up to, yeah, and you kind of connect that up to this. And you have a little vacuum as well that you connect up to the other side of one of these little inlets. And you actually suck in some of the air. You take it right to a site. And then we've sent off these samples. We've taken about 10 of them to a lab in Simi, California that will do the analysis. And we also have a scientist, doctor, who's been doing the narrative and analysis that we include in our reports. So that's something that we'll be continuing to do.
So this air monitoring has been, I've done it twice in our community this year. And one of the sites that I tested is actually across Liebrook Elementary School. And on this, our results, it showed that it had elevated levels of hydrogen sulfide. You know, and this is a site that's sitting there next door to these kids and staff, you know, 5 days a week, and they're there. They're just sitting there, breathing in these gases that are being allowed to just leak. You know, we brought this to the attention of the state, but who knows where it's at now, you know, because the state, again, with what Mark said, it depends on oil, you know, which is really sad when they admit that or they say that, because there's real people being affected in real time, and they don't see that. So this air monitoring shows us what's around us, you know, because that's what they want, right? That's what they want, data, paperwork. And so we have to show these, and we're going to do water testing again, because it's important that we get these samples within the community. And we're going to continue to do this monitoring. And I'll go ahead and set up the bucket maybe in the back so everyone can take a look at it.
So as I mentioned, and as Kendra mentioned, we're also doing water testing. We're trying to get some baseline information. That way, if we do see a fluctuation and change in the water, we can also incorporate this into our report. And the report, by the way, is meant to provide recommendations to the Bureau of Land and Management that they have to incorporate within this resource management plan update. So we're actually trying to document as much as we possibly can so that they can put some mitigation plans in place. You can't really see this, but this is kind of what some of the roads look like, basically. These roads aren't meant to have high impact pressure continually being used by these large trucks. So some of these ruts were like a foot deep at some point, 2 feet. So they're pretty much impassable, and you need these roads. You can't really see this one. But some of these sites as well, there's a stark difference between how the wells are managed as well in like Farmington, Aztec area versus kind of in Greater Chaco area. And this is a storage site or a well site that's not fenced, and you can see that there are horses just kind of within this, feeding around this site. You also have cattle and livestock that feed around these sites as well. So there have been some steps taken, largely through the efforts of people like Daniel So, Sam Sage, some of the Chaco Coalition members, Kendra Pinto. But they were going to propose the Pinion Pipeline. It would have been a 150-mile pipeline that would have kind of cut through the greater landscape, where you also have these ancient roads and other landscapes as well. I think it would have spurned fracking and would have been able to carry 130 miles. So that's on hold for now, and I think it was largely because of the market conditions at the time. We are also looking at state legislative efforts. State Representative Derek Linty, who also represents constituents in this area, sponsored House Memorial 70 that passed in both the House and the Senate. At the latest January lease sale, the BLM auctioned off 843 acres. But the state director, Amy Luthers, had applied conditions of approval, or like mitigation measures that the oil and gas companies have to consider that addresses the noise, light, and truck traffic. And that's something that has never been done before. We're also working on the community health impact report, and we're wanting to develop that into a full health impact assessment that also looks at some of the socio-cultural impacts as well, and much broader than just kind of health. And the BLM, in working in cooperation with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, did release their 2017 scoping report. They held about 10 scoping meetings, which is kind of unprecedented, from November of last year to February. And within their scoping report, they're going to plan to address a whole list of different issues that people were able to comment at these periods. And this is kind of like our coalition ask, our platform. This is what we're calling for the BLM. We're calling for an immediate moratorium on all drilling, fracking, and leasing until the resource management plan amendment's complete. That likely won't come out until next fall of next year. We're asking that tribal consultation occur at every single stage of the decision-making process, and not just governmental to governmental, but also at the local chapter levels as well. We're also calling for community protections and fair share distribution, for a full environmental health review. And we also are calling that the BLM lead a way to develop and implement alternative economic development and a path for renewable energy in the area as well. And I think that's it.
All right, next up we've got Asha Canalos. She's a community organizer from Minisink, New York. Also an incredible artist. She did the beautiful portraits that are back here, you see back there behind you. You should definitely check out her project. It's New Mexico Story Power. And just in case you think this event is only about Chaco, I want to tell you in a little while we're going to hear from Elaine Semino, and she's going to tell us what's going on in Sandoval County. We're sitting on top of what's called the Albuquerque Basin. There's a lot of oil and gas right underneath us right now, and we think that the industry is moving to try and exploit that too. So you'll hear about that in a minute, but here's Asha to share her personal story with us.
Hi guys, it's really great to see all your beautiful faces here. I really appreciate your being here today. I'm going to try to describe some things that happened over a course of many years very quickly, and the things that I learned from them in 12 minutes. So bear with me, it's going to be a weird and bumpy ride. So 10 years ago, if someone had told me I was going to become an anti-fractivist, I would have laughed in their face. I thought it had really had nothing to do with me. I was an artist, I was finishing grad school in New York City, and I was to make a living what I had done since high school, which is gardening and landscape design. And I was hitting a wall because I was working for these wealthy clients, and I was realizing that there was very little meaning to what I was doing. No one was enjoying these gardens, no one was spending time in them, and it began to feel very purposeless. And I started nagging my then boyfriend, now husband, I want to move out of the city, I want to be closer to nature, and I want to find a greater sense of meaning in my life. And boy, did I find that. By 2009, I'd convinced my now husband, and we started looking for a place, and it took us a year, and we saved, and the mortgage industry was a mess, and it was really hard to secure a farm, but finally we did it. And we found this amazing 11-acre place in Minisink, New York, in these rolling hills. And this was our house, and we felt incredibly, incredibly blessed. And we had stands of blueberries, and we had tons of fruit trees, and we immediately got to work. We had all these amazing creatures that lived in the woods that constituted half of our property. We had ripe fruit on the trees coming in, and we immediately started making raised beds and growing things. And then a couple months in, we started seeing these signs that popped up on people's lawns, and they said, "Stop the mini sink compressor station." What the hell is a compressor station? We wondered. We had never heard of one. So we started doing some research, and we were pretty horrified pretty immediately, because we found out that we'd seen the movie Gasland. We knew there was fracking happening just over the river in Pennsylvania, a lot of it. We were against it, but we didn't know that much really more about it than that. We thought because hydraulic fracturing was not happening in New York that we were safe. We discovered that compressors are built along pipelines to move the gas faster at a higher velocity and pressure, and that makes things more profitable for the industry. We found out that there had been many fatal accidents and explosions at compressor stations, one of them by the same company that wanted to build a compressor in our town just the year before. And that at compressor stations, methane and a cocktail of hundreds of chemicals, many of them known neurotoxins, carcinogens, endocrine disruptors, were directly released into the air, along with tons of VOCs, volatile organic compounds, and particulate matter. In fact, later we would find out that at compressor stations, they were often at higher amounts than at actual extraction sites because it's so condensed. We had no idea that the oil and gas industry was in the beginning stages of a massive fracking build-out, and an infrastructure build-out from Pennsylvania, from the fields of Marcellus Shale to and West Virginia and Ohio, out east to all points along the coast, including to LNG ports that they were trying to ship this gas up to Canada to sell on the global market to the highest bidder. So we're not talking all about domestic security here. We're not talking about domestic needs for energy. We're talking about people making a ton of money on the backs of the American people. Central to this build-out was a federal agency known as FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, a little-known agency that approves most of our nation's pipelines, compressors, and other oil and gas infrastructure. We had never heard of them either, but we'd all get to know each other real well. So lesson number one, fracking ain't just fracking. It's a cradle-to-grave process. Fracking has many faces. There are several forms of extraction and infrastructure, and many different agencies, local and federal, are responsible for approving its many forms. Also key here, if you put a dent in one aspect of it, a pipeline, a compressor, you are also putting a dent in another aspect of it, the extraction, and vice versa. They all are hinged. They need each other to work. They can't work without the other component. So we met up with these other folks, our neighbors that we didn't know, to discuss what was happening and formulate a plan. And this is a picture of the build-out. And it was a really crazy social experiment because we were this unusual collection of people, this really unlikely team. A portion of us were left-leaning liberals, some of us even involved in the Occupy movement, which was happening then. And then we had quite a lot of us who were conservatives and as far right as the Tea Party, or then as far right as the Tea Party. We had a large contingent of 9/11 first responders who had moved to Minisink, most of whom suffered serious health problems resulting from the events of 9/11 and the months after, and had moved up to Minisink for the clean air. In fact, we had so many 9/11 first responders, cops, and firemen from New York City that they called our town Guns and Hoses. Then there were a few anarchists. And there were a lot of back-to-the-land folks and libertarians and farmers whose families had lived in Minisink as far back as the 1700s. It was weird. It was weird. It was uncomfortable. We disagreed about a lot of stuff. Folks did not really know how to talk to each other. At first, we offended each other constantly. It was awkward and it was strange, but we kept coming back to the table because we had to, because we needed each other, because we couldn't move very far forward alone. So lesson number 2, individual interpersonal relationships are at the core of any progress we make as a larger movement. These relationships, these alliances, and our ability to trust and depend on one another are what allow us to push forward and make progress. We can't afford to walk this path alone when we disagree here and there, which will happen. We have to actually expect that it will happen and move past it. This applies to grassroots groups as much as it applies to big environmental groups. It applies to folks on the left. It applies to folks on the right. So it doesn't serve us very well to make fracking a partisan issue, because fracking doesn't care what your political background is when it poisons your water or your land or your air. So we started meeting with these people, our neighbors, and the months went by with plannings and meetings, and we grew our tomatoes, and our berries came in and they were amazing. And generally things were just popping on the farm. It was, you could just throw a seed and it would grow. It was amazing. And then fall came, and I began writing press releases and reaching out to media on behalf of our group, trying to garner some public attention on these matters. The FERC docket continued on for months. We went back and forth with them. It became increasingly clear that this was not going to be a quick or an easy process. And then Hurricane Irene tore through the area, and parts of the Black Dirt region where we lived, it's an amazing agricultural area, were underwater, and a lot of the fall crops were destroyed. Everyone was battening down the hatches trying to prepare themselves for this battle ahead. And in the spring, things whipped up again as we were dealt various blows by the pipeline company. We discovered that Millennium Pipeline, the company that intended to build a compressor in our town, had an arrangement with another company, CPV, who intended to build a giant fracked gas power plant in a neighboring town 7 miles away. This constituted illegal segmentation. I'm going to say that again, illegal segmentation. This is happening here in New Mexico. It's happening all over the country. The project should have been presented as a whole, and it was illegal that it was not. By presenting a massive project in tiny chunks, as if they were unrelated, both companies avoided a more rigorous environmental screening. Millennium could get away with a super basic EA, an environmental assessment, rather than a full EIS, an environmental impact statement, for example. But Millennium would not admit that they had this arrangement. We got our hands on the signed document with signatures of both the CEOs of both companies. It's illegal for them not to disclose this, but they seem to have a get-out-of-jail-free card with FERC. And we started to notice things just weren't quite right with FERC. It did not feel like a level playing field. In fact, it felt like a wall. Especially when we discovered that Minisync was basically a giant industry experiment, the first time a pipeline company tried to site a mega compressor, over 12,000 horsepower turbines, that close to a populated area. We were the first time that happened. And there didn't even appear to be a true need for it, if you didn't consider the power plant that they weren't admitting that they were trying to link up to. And so we headed down to DC. This is more of my community. We went down to FERC. We went to attend a FERC monthly meeting and to see for ourselves what was going on. We were the first community group in the country to attend a FERC meeting regarding a gas infrastructure project. No one went to FERC meetings, only industry press seemed to attend them. We chartered a bus for the trip, and when we arrived, we felt like we'd gone to the Emerald City. We pulled back the curtain, and there was no one there. We couldn't believe that all these important decisions affecting people's lives across the country were being made in large part by this small group of people who worked in this building that literally looked like the creepy headquarters of a crew of corporate villains in a comic book. And they were definitely, absolutely disturbed by our presence there. All the kids and babies, strollers, older folks with canes, the farmers. We literally brought the village of Minisink to FERC. Lesson number 3, it's critical to look policymakers in the eye and make sure that they see the faces of the people whose lives their decisions will impact. Also importantly, on that first trip to DC, we got ourselves an attorney, a DC-based pipeline lawyer, Carolyn Elephant, who believed in us and our case because we'd already made legal precedents with FERC and had uncovered quite a lot of incriminating information. We worked with her through the rest of the FERC docket and through what ultimately became our case at the US Court of Appeals. And then we took a tiny break and we got married in a small ceremony on our farm, further connecting us to that land and that place. And it felt like we were getting married during wartime. And then we received word that Millennium, through FERC loophole known as a tolling order, had been given permission to go ahead and start construction on the compressor, despite the fact that our court case wouldn't even be heard by then. And after a year of working to defend our community, all of a sudden, all these trucks began rolling in. And the majority had license plates from Texas, Oklahoma, North Dakota. So much for all those local jobs that they had touted. And these guys driving these trucks, they wouldn't look at us, just straight ahead like zombies. They were used to this. They moved from town to town, living in man camps, working long hours. A lot of reports about man camps in recent years detail drug use and a rise in prostitution, sexual abuse, increased violence, and sexual assault. That is a real thing, and I'm so glad you brought that up. We tried and tried to get press to cover what was happening, but at first we weren't too successful. We needed to do something. We needed people to know what was happening. We were starting to realize, lesson number 4, that media attention and public pressure were the things that got us real, meaningful responses from elected officials. Our community had thorough discussions about what our next steps would be, and so did my husband and I. My neighbor, a father of 2 young girls, and I decided to get arrested. And on October 2nd, 2012, I was handcuffed while peacefully blocking construction vehicles from entering the slated site of the compressor. It wasn't how I imagined I would spend my honeymoon, but sometimes just that's the way the cookie crumbles. Almost immediately, we began receiving media attention on our legal case, and our elected officials seemed much more responsive to our calls. NPR came out to interview us, Associated Press ran an in-depth story, the Wall Street Journal even covered us, and then Vice News. But the construction continued, and they ripped trees down along the right-of-way. And then Superstorm Sandy came, and most of Minisink didn't have power, and it was cold. Neighbors helped each other out with chopping up fallen trees and delivering water. Millennium Pipeline, however, during this ensuing power outage, proceeded to bring in gigantic generators, lit up the construction site like a football field, and started drilling through bedrock from 7 in the morning until 11 p.m. at night. It was so loud that our house shook. We couldn't get in touch with my aunt and her family. The phone in New York City, the lines were busy. But when we did, we found out that they had lost their car, their home on the Lower East Side, and most of their belongings. We began to realize climate change was not this far away thing. It was here, and it was now, and it was touching our lives. And we kept sending Minisink contingents down to FERC, to every monthly meeting. And we started, this was our youngest Minisink activist. we started bringing friends, other grassroots groups from other states who were also fighting pipelines and compressors. New York, Maryland, New Jersey at first, and then it grew and it grew. This awareness of FERC and their abuses. And we found ways to mess around with their own closed caption videos and insert ourselves into their documents of these events. And back in Minisync, they built the compressor at a breakneck speed while we were still waiting for our case to be heard. And then they began testing it and doing what are referred to as blowdowns, giant releases of emissions. And almost immediately we began receiving complaints from families all over Minisync about respiratory problems, headaches, dizziness, nosebleeds, nausea, abdominal pain, and rashes. And we smelled the releases, and they were horrifying. They smelled like a fake like a citrus deodorizer smell. They put an odorizer on the gas. Sometimes it smelled like that, and sometimes it smelled like rotten eggs, and sometimes it smelled like nothing at all. We didn't know when it was running. We lived a quarter mile away from the compressor, and you couldn't see the emissions like you can with coal, but with a special camera, it was alarming how much methane and emissions were streaming out of this compressor. And our unusual alliances with one another strengthened. We began to feel like family, especially the 24 of us who met regularly to make decisions for our community. I was really blown away by this, our ability to work together despite political and cultural backgrounds during a highly polarized time in our nation. It was beautiful to see. It was hopeful. It showed us what the US could look like if we, the people, started exhibiting more tolerance towards each other and working together. One of our neighbors was a 9/11 first responder, shown here. He was a cop who had been on riot control and now was a protester. He was a charismatic guy and he was a community leader. We took this photo of him and we made a graphic with it. And we made a graphic of the big Minisync Matters army truck that was driven around at every rally. And then we made t-shirts of the graphics. And then we wore the t-shirts everywhere. Like at the rally that we held at Union Square in New York City, and the rallies at our senators' offices. This is the Minisync Matters truck being gloriously driven around Union Square during our rally. And we rallied at our senators' offices in New York and DC. And everywhere we went, the kids of Minisync came with us. And we started meeting with other folks fighting infrastructure all across New York State and giving tours of what was happening. People wanted to see. A lot of people on those tours got headaches or had respiratory issues during the tour, as is the case as is happening in Chaco right now. We continued to forge these alliances. Sometimes we even had fun. We worked with people all over New York to push for a ban on fracking. We tried desperately to get folks to look at infrastructure, not only just extraction. But by 2013, I was starting to have health symptoms regularly, and I tried to ignore them, but I couldn't. I was dizzy frequently, like really dizzy, and my muscles ached all over. I had headaches, insomnia, stomach issues. It didn't seem like I could eat anything. And I felt wiped out constantly, just totally exhausted. And we continued to work with our allies. But I noticed that when I worked outside, I was getting rashes where my skin was exposed to the air. And people all over Minisync were. I wasn't alone in any of my symptoms. We didn't want to believe that it was real. No one wants to believe that this is real. We kept working with our friends in PA. They had come to our rescue from the very beginning, and these people were going through so much more than we were. But they took time out of their lives to come help us. So we went to their rallies and their events. by this time you can really see in my face, I was getting pretty sick. And finally I went to a doctor, and they ran tons of tests, and they told me my immune system was out of whack, and I was having autoimmune responses, and my adrenal system was way out of balance. They diagnosed me with fibromyalgia, and I told them what I'd read about health effects of living near fracking infrastructure, which pretty much mirror those of fibromyalgia. But most doctors had no real frame of reference for the reports they were getting from patients, and they said they didn't know that much about that, and they gave me a prescription for painkillers and another to treat spasms, and said, you'll probably have this condition all your life, so you're going to need to make a lot of adjustments. And then there was a major gas leak at the brand new mini-sink compressor, and it was terrifying. Just as we'd feared, our tiny volunteer fire department showed up with no idea of how to handle an emergency of that magnitude. And the small rural road that led to the compressor was completely blocked, so people couldn't get in and people couldn't get out. We literally wondered if we were going to die. The PIR of the compressor, the potential impact radius, is half a mile. We're talking about explosions and fires. Half a mile. And we were a quarter of a mile away. It was a frightening reality check. And as this was happening, we turned again our attention to the massive power plant that we knew the two companies had been planning for many years. We worked on a statewide map of infrastructure and grassroots organizations in New York called You Are Here. This is at the site of the power plant in 2014. It's untouched, it's pristine. This is Lenape Burial Ground. This is also the site of a fault line. This is that same field now. They did build that power plant, and it's almost done. And yes, that is James Cromwell, the actor, his head in the corner. He also was arrested for protesting this combined project. We continued to work with our allies in New York City because they had supported us once again. And here we are blocking the West Side Highway peacefully to draw public attention to the fact that a massive frack gas pipeline was being constructed under the Hudson River into New York City and landing under the brand new Whitney Museum. And we were realizing we were part of a global movement to end fracking. It was happening everywhere. And then in 2014, miraculously, New York won the ban on fracking. Lesson number 5, people power is the ultimate power. And New Yorkers were elated, they were jubilant. And then in 2014, right after that, we got all these calls from our friends and family who said, oh my God, congratulations, this is wonderful news, finally you're safe. And we said, no, no we're not, because they banned hydraulic fracturing. They didn't ban pipelines, compressor stations, waste facilities, or LNG terminals. Sucked. And by this time, I was having such bad muscle pain that I was having a hard time putting a sweater on or lifting a jug of water. I didn't want to take the painkillers the doctors gave me because I didn't want to become dependent on them. And plus, I couldn't get work done if I took them. So I tried to just live with the pain. And then we'd made the difficult decision to stop farming for various reasons, a lot of them having to do with moral dilemmas we had about selling food that was tainted by all these chemicals. And because we weren't farming and because of the legal costs of the case, we landed in a really bad financial situation and had to temporarily borrow large amounts of money from our family, which was really embarrassing to us because we'd always both been very independent people. And my husband, who had been teaching at Pratt Institute before we left the city, took a job at a warehouse loading boxes because there were very few jobs in our area and we were desperately needing the money. And then on May 1st, of 2014, finally, some 3 years after our struggle began, our case was heard at the US Court of Appeals. And allies came from 5 different states to support us in the courtroom. And in the courtroom, our case publicly disclosed for the first time that FERC approved 99% of all gas infrastructure projects put before them. That means that in 30 years, they had approved every proposal they'd received from the industry except for one. And we proved illegal segmentation by Millennium Pipeline, and that FERC had approved a dangerous plan over a not-so-dangerous plan, and that their decision was in legal terms arbitrary and capricious. It didn't hold water. And the judges, the majority of whom were Democrats, seemed extremely receptive. They really wanted to know what Millennium had done and why, and what FERC had done. And then we waited on pins and needles for their decision. And yes, I am in the front row with the children who are, a lot of them are taller than me. We waited. I had never wanted anything so badly in my life. It took a couple of months, but the judges finally handed down their decision. They agreed that FERC nor Millennium had followed all the rules they should have. They didn't. They said they sympathized with our situation. But in a nutshell, they said to us, natural gas development is needed in the US for domestic security purposes, and unfortunately, certain areas, including Mini Sink, must become sacrifice zones. So, suck it up, live with it. Lesson number 6, sacrifice zone is a real term used by our government in designating areas that will receive the brunt of impacts from fossil fuel development. When the decision came, it was a Friday afternoon, we had the windows open and we lived on a hill, and we could literally hear other people yelling and crying out in anger all across Mini Sink as they opened up their emails. And the exodus began. And needless to say, property values had dropped dramatically. People began selling their homes for whatever they could get just to get out. Some folks, like the family who lived directly across the street, 600 feet from the compressor, had to default on their mortgages because no one would even look at their home. And they couldn't live like that with their 4 kids, getting sick regularly and sealing up all the windows in the house, afraid to go outside. At this point, I was so sick, weak, and sad I hardly knew what to do with myself. I was supposed to speak about infrastructure and FERC at 3 different events at the People's Climate March, and a week or so before the events, I woke up and I couldn't turn my head to the left or to the right. I was in excruciating pain and I could barely stand up or walk. I had to cancel my presentations. I couldn't even drive a car to get there. This period went on for a while, just stuck and sick. I don't have too many photos from this time. We weren't able to just leave, but at the same time we had to leave. And it was tremendously painful to say farewell to our friends and our neighbors, some of whom planned to leave, some of whom didn't. And we started to shut down our farm and take apart the things we had carefully built. And in October of 2015, we said goodbye to our life in Mini Sink, our farm, our home that we loved. And we got in a car and we drove across the country and we ended up in New Mexico, of all places. Because we have family here and because we had to go somewhere. And it took a long time, but slowly my health improved. And I promised myself I would take a break from anti-fracking work, but I couldn't help myself. I pretty much immediately dove into getting involved, starting with attending a rally in Santa Fe at the sale of lease allotments by the BLM, when the auctions were still held in public, not online as they are now to avoid protest and public scrutiny. Another rally at BLM headquarters, and rallies in Albuquerque against DAPL, against the Dakota Access Pipeline, and also against what was happening in Chaco, and more rallies in Santa Fe. Fighting fracking is very different in New Mexico compared to New York, in that much of the focus here is on the BLM, because New Mexico has such a large amount of federal lands, and that while racial injustice is playing out in New York and other eastern states, in terms of communities of color and Native communities being disproportionately affected by the harms of fracking, out west, this is a much more prominent aspect of the struggle. Here in New Mexico, over 91% of federal and public lands are currently leased to the industry, and it's mostly affecting communities in the Four Corners region. They're getting sick and disenfranchised, like we were in Minisink, and our friends in PA. And now the industry set its sights on the Albuquerque Basin. But we've got to remember, this is all connected, that when we fight for clean air and water in Albuquerque, we must acknowledge and support our allies in the Chaco area, who have already been fighting for years. Their fight is our fight. It's all the same fight. And I was fortunate enough to meet these two ladies, Maya and Delaney, who had also recently moved to New Mexico and had their own experiences resisting fossil fuel development, but on the West Coast. And we decided to form a group to try to do what we could to amplify the voices of those resisting in New Mexico, called New Mexico Story Power. We were focused on giving these crises a human quality. Facts and figures just don't work for a lot of people. They need human narratives to understand the depth of the problem. And we met with amazing advocates and community organizers like Kendra Pinto, Maya King Flaherty, Mike Eisenfeld, and Daniel So. And they generously shared their stories, and in most cases we cried openly as we recorded them. And we began getting involved in events that help publicize the issue and bring people together, like the symposium we held at the Santa Fe Art Institute, and this today. Recently I was asked if I knew 6 years ago what I know now, would I have done it the same thing? Would I have stuck in the fight for so long? I had to think about that. It's a really hard question. But ultimately, I met some of the best human beings ever in this fight, many of whom became lifelong friends. And I saw a side of humanity that changed me forever. I saw strength and boundless love, and I gained deep respect for people and our fragile, incredible world. And my heart opened up in ways that I never imagined. I would do it all over again. Yes. I can't unknow the things I know or unsee all the heavy, sad things that I've seen. So I can't look away from this problem. What I can do is share with others what happened and what I learned and how important it is to fight and help them with their fights, our fight. We've got to take care of each other. We've got to play the long game here. We need self-care. We need to make sure we get enough sleep, spend time with our families, and check out when we need to check out and come back to the table refreshed. We can't afford to burn out. We can't afford to walk away from this. People who were alive before us can't do anything about this. The people yet to be born can do nothing. It falls upon us to get organized and tackle these threats. We are the future that we've been waiting for. Thanks.